So this is kind of a weird look for me because now there is internal lighting, and so my eyeglasses reflect and I look really weird. Well, not that I don't look weird in normal light, but so people who watch the show, watch the channel, which I appreciate, and I thank you very much for watching it, have asked different countries that have historically had strong power, have strong presence in the World Cups. However, those who have slightly underachieved, and countries like United States underachieve, countries like the Netherlands underachieve, and England is prone to underachieving as the matter of course. Well, to me, there's three different stories. Now, if you look at the United States, and today I think, or yesterday, I looked up the U.S. roster in 2010 World Cup, which was under Bob Bradley, and you count the number of players that were at the time plying their trade in European leagues, and I counted 16. I could have been off by one or two. I'm not a wizard in math. And when Bruce Arena played Trinidad and Tobago last week ago, there were three. There is Bobby Wood, Christian Pulisic, and DeAndre Yedlin. So you went from having a lineup full with international players, to having only a small percentage of those on the field with international background. And I think that was the major, that was the major breakdown. Now, of course, you say, well, Michael Bradley played in Europe in the past. Well, in 2010, those were players in their prime in Europe, in decent leagues. And then you had, a few guys like Clarence Goodson, who was in Norway, and you had Edson Bartel, who was in Bundesliga 2, and Hercules Gomez, who was in Mexico. But for the most part, you could take 12, 13 players, and Bob didn't take all of them, certainly didn't play Stu Holden much, who were, in the prime of their career in good leagues. And then, to quote from Jermaine Jones, is that you don't have to tell those guys where to run. They know the spacing, they know the positioning, they're less likely to make mistakes that plague American/MLS players. And these are the same MLS players who go down to Mexico and crap their pants. So that's particular only to the United States. There are two factors here. United States not sending enough players abroad, and the United States, or at least MLS, bringing in players from abroad, are really generally not motivating officially. In fact, being mad at some players, certainly mad at Klinsmann for advocating players go to better leagues abroad. And so in MLS, although improving, is still far from the level of the top dozen leagues, European leagues, or South American leagues. That's the result you see. Now in England, how do you qualify England? Well, to me, and I was a kid, the first match I ever saw, and I was a real little type, was the 1970 World Cup. Yes, I saw it. This is 47 years ago, but I was very small. But I remember the first match I actually saw on TV by myself was England against West Germany in 1970 quarterfinals. Now both teams were full of legends. West Germany had Gerd Müller and Franz Beckenbauer and Sepp Maier and Stanley Buda and Uwe Seeler and Wolfgang Overath. So it was just kind of a Hall of Fame type roster. But so was the case with England. Now, that was one of the greatest games played in the World Cup history, with England, most of you don't know it, England leading 2-0, and then Germany coming back to tie in regulation and then winning in overtime on Gerd Müller's goal. Now, Gerd Müller was my favorite player growing up. But England hasn't been, it made the semifinals in 1990, but since then, this is 47 years, 48 years, 24 major tournaments if you count the Euros and the World Cup, and England sucked. They have underperformed more than any other major nation, and the major nation is really Soviet Union, England, France, Germany, Italy, Spain. Now, why is it happening? Well, the superstitious part of me, and it's a fairly significant superstitious part of me, says it's a curse of 1966 World Cup final, where Sir Geoffrey Hurst, then simply Geoffrey Hurst, took a shot in overtime. The ball bounced off the post, back out. Karl-Heinz Schnellinger, no, I didn't see that game live. Here, but it's on YouTube, of course. And so anyway, so the Soviet line judge Tofik Bahramov considered it a goal. England went up. They won the World Cup in overtime in the final. But since then, they haven't been up to that level. So if you believe it's some sort of a curse that's afflicted, because England never admitted that they benefit from the call. Now, in 2010, which is much later than 1966, the situation was reversed, where Manuel Neuer scooped the ball from behind the goal line. It would have been a tying goal for England at the end of the first half. It was a header by Frank Lampard. And Germany immediately says, yeah, obviously it was seen on every camera. The ball was like, half a yard behind the goal. Well, Germany, the German coaches, players, personnel, commentators immediately says, yeah, we cheated, or the ref helped us. And 4 years later, they end up sitting at home with the World Cup. English players never admitted to it. So that's a part of the curse. Now, what are the real components if you exclude the superstition? England historically had great players. However, the English style of the game was a bit idiosyncratic. Now, for those who know geography, know that England itself and the larger Great Britain, all islands, is surrounded by water. So it's a very rainy terrain. There's a lot of rain, especially going from the fall through the winter. It doesn't really snow, doesn't really get cold, but it rains a lot. So in the old days, pitches were just full of mud. You can't dribble. You couldn't dribble. You had to play long ball. You hit the long ball into the box. You try to win the header. You try to pop the header. And that's how it's been in England forever. It's been fast. It's been long ball. It's been power-based, but not as much emphasized on the skill of individual skills, even though, of course, there have been a lot of great English players with plenty of skill. So in '66, when they do win the World Cup, and to some extent, certainly they were in the World Cup quite deservedly, they can play a long ball at home. They can pump balls. They could try to win them. Now, they had great players at the time, and they had great players since. But that was their style that worked with them, worked for them. It doesn't work as well when you go to a neutral territory. We don't have that type of a home advantage, and when you can't just pump the ball up into the box hoping for your guys to win it. And so even if some of their misfortunes were simply the matter of the balls rolling the other way, that happened in 1971, 73 when they lost to Poland in the home and away series. Now, Poland was a good team, so sometimes you just draw the unlucky card, or straw, whatever, and you don't make it. What I noticed in the 80s, and it was under Sir Bobby Robson, who was one of the better English coaches, and what struck me was that because of the aforementioned high ball into the box, the English central defenders are, how shall we put it, sturdy types. They're big, they're strong, they can win the high ball. The problem for England is that nobody plays the high ball against them. It's just so sad. It's like saying, we're going to run into the wall. Well, you're not going to beat England by playing high balls into the box. You're going to beat England by playing small, scale, fast strikers who can dribble around the big, tall English central defenders. Now, one of the biggest matches I remember from the 80s was England playing against the Netherlands in 1988 Euros, where England played their, Phil Thompson and I think Des Walker, two strong central defenders, and the Netherlands under Rinus Michels played Marco van Basten in the middle, and he alone could dribble between both of them because he was fast enough. He could always create his own shot. The same happened in '86 in the famous Hand of God goal. Well, actually, the famous Hand of God goal was just simply a cheat by Maradona. But the famous Maradona run from half-field line, he's going against the central defenders who are slow, and he just runs around them. Now, if you saw Tim Cahill, who's one of the latest generation of tall, slow English defenders, that's the same problems that happen, over the years. If they're playing Uruguay, this was the last World Cup, and they play Luis Suarez and Edison Cavani, you don't need a tall center. You need somebody who can stop fast, quick players making darting runs through the defense. And that's not what Tim Cahill can do. Now, what do you do if you're an English coach? Do you put out a midfielder? Do you play fullbacks in central defense? And when do you start preparing for it? Traditionally, they have never prepared. Essentially, they play their all-star team. And the English all-star team is designed to play like an English team can play, which means a certain style that doesn't favor it versus other high-quality opponents. To me, that's a part of the problem. The other problem, they're just weak. And in the crunch, I was watching the 2016 Euros. They're playing against Russia. Now, Russia is another team that craps its pants anywhere it goes, especially since the old Soviet days. They had one decent run in 2008. Since then, they've been a huge disappointment, especially considering that the old Soviet team actually won the Euros in 1960, played in the final in 64, and 72, and 88. So it was a pretty good team, for the international quality, competitions. And Ian Dark and Steve McManaman was doing a color commentary. This is like 2 minutes, 3 minutes to go into the game. England is leading. And Dark says, "Are you expecting something bad to happen?" And McManaman says, "Well, yeah, because that's how we screw up. They always screw up. They screw up far beyond the talent level that they have." And so sure enough, one of those Russian central defenders jumps up in the air, hits a header over Joe Hart, and the match is tied. So they always manage to screw up. Now, to me, I can attribute it to a curse, because there's no reason for a talented team, which they are, to keep screwing up and to have this foreboding sense of disaster. But it happens. That's what happens. That's what happens with England. The Netherlands is a different issue. They simply don't have consistent talent in every cycle. Now, when I was a little kid, preteens, in early teens, and I remember the 1974 team, that's when they had like 5 or 6 Hall of Fame type players on the squad. They had Johan Cruyff, they have Robbie Rensenbrink, they have Johnny Rep, they had, of course, Johan Neskens and Rudy Krol and Ari Hahn. That was just a team full of great, great players. And of course, they destroy their position along the way until they run into West Germany, which was similarly staffed with great talent, and ended up losing in the final. But 4 years later, they made it, but without Cruyff. They also played in the final. But then there was a drop. And when Cruyff retired, when Rep retired, when Rensenbrink retired, they couldn't just conjure up as much firepower. And they had to wait until the late 80s when Ruud Gullit and Marco van Basten came on the scene. And they were, Gullit won, 2-time Player of the Year, World Player of the Year. Van Basten was a Player of the Year. So they rode that talent back to the top. Van Basten was like leading scorer in Italy with the best club and AC Milan and so on and so forth. Well, they don't have the talent right now. They don't have Arjen Robben. They don't have a central striker anywhere the quality of. Bas Dost is okay. They don't have another great striker that was a Ruud van Nistelrooy type, or Johnny Rep or Robbie Rensenbrink. And the problem with them, they also don't have defensive talent. And right now they're going into the lull in coaching. Historically they were also up and down, but now it's a combination of the talent being inferior and of the coaching being inferior. Now they rehired Dick Advocaat, who's a solid coach, not a great national team coach. He's a better club coach. And he sort of evened out the ship, but they still didn't make it. And and that's the way it is for them. Robben is 33. They don't have any other comparable winger to him. Van der Vaart, Schneider, they're all, Van der Vaart is like in Denmark now. And so they just play up to their capability, which isn't very high.